Hi, I'm Chris Buist from Coleago Consulting, and today I'm going to be talking about the transformation and delivery phase of managed service contracts, and in particular what operators really need to be doing at that time. So, hi, I'm Chris Buist I'm a director from Coleago Consulting. We're a very specialist telecoms consultancy. I've been about 30 years in the industry. Luckily, I can see lots of other grey-haired people here too, so I feel I'm not the only one. Mark very kindly said I could talk about anything I wanted, which is probably more for him. What I'm going to talk about today is a certain phase of the life cycle for managed services. Most analyst and consultant presentations tend to focus on the first phases, the strategy and the engagement, so completing a deal. And quite rightly so, because in fact, the more effort you put into that, the more time you take over that, the better the deal that you do, and you de-risk the subsequent phases. But in fact, it's the subsequent phases. That's 3 to 10 years that you're talking about, and there's a lot that can be done during that period as well to improve the returns you get from a managed services deal. So, as I said, most people tend to focus on those early phases, and I can talk for hours about that, but I'm not going to. I'm going to talk for 20 minutes, half an hour, about that last phase, the transformation and delivery phase. I'm only going to talk about two specific aspects of it. There's lots of other things that can be done during this phase, but I'm just going to talk about two specific aspects. One is what we call periodic reviews, I liken this sometimes to marriage counselling, actually. So I'll come on to that one first of all. And the other thing is when you come to the end of the phase, when you're coming up to the contract expiry, contract renewal point. So those are the two aspects I'm going to talk about. And just to say, this applies to both network managed services deals, BSS managed services deals, or frankly any managed services deal. It applies to both mobile and fixed operators. I have to say that I think today this will be more interesting from the network perspective, because for me, network managed service providers, whereas Amdocs and CSG were talking about three sort of phases of managed services, most network managed services, I think, are still back in that very first phase, just moving into that second phase. They're not as mature as on the BSS side. So this applies a lot more, I think, to network managed services deals, but could be applied to both. And I just link back to the EC survey that's been done. I've just picked out two of the questions that were in there. One was about how people rated the managed services experience. And this is at a bit more detailed level than you saw. Basically, the scores down here at 1.8 is verging on the people somewhat agree that they've got a good return from their managed services experience. So I would actually argue that most managed services contracts, there is a lot of room for improvement, okay? A lot of room for improvement. And the other one which Mark did put up earlier on was what some of the biggest challenges are. So around cultural fit, objectives not being met. And this is all from the delivery phase, that 3 to 10 years that you spend together. A lot of these ones you can mitigate during the pre-deal phase, during the strategy and engagement phase. You can mitigate against these things, but these issues crop up time and time and time again, and that's what my focus is going to be now. So, as I said, you can liken managed services. I mean, it's a very hackneyed analogy, but you can liken managed services to a marriage, and as in a marriage, after the honeymoon period, that's when you get to know each other really, really deeply, and you start to find faults in each other. And you sort of muddle through, you get over those, and occasionally it flares up into big arguments, not necessarily always litigation. But what we often find is that the service provider and the operator are muddling through. And actually, what is very, very useful that we found is to do these periodic reviews. So if you've got a 10-year contract, maybe you'll do this once or twice during the life of the contract. And what we do is, through our marriage counselling, we look at 3 dimensions. We look at the relationship, we look at the delivery mechanism, and we look at the performance, the actual outcomes from the contract. And we go down to that and a number of characteristics, as I've got up here, but even into more detail on each of these points. And we ask the people that get involved in these reviews, we ask them to rate all these aspects, all these characteristics, on a 1 to 5 scale. So where 1 might be something is just non-existent or completely failing, 5 at the other extreme is it's working excellently, no further room for improvement. So that's how we get the input to these reviews. The process for doing it is to get the senior management together from the service provider and the operator and agree what the objectives are for doing this review. And it might be that we're not going to do all those 3 dimensions. It might be that we're just going to focus on one of those dimensions. So it's important to agree what are the objectives for doing the review. We then obviously modify that framework for that specific piece of work. We also set targets. We agree what the targets are for every single characteristic, because you don't necessarily need to be a 5 in everything. Maybe some things are absolutely critical, you must try and achieve a 5 in. Others perhaps would be good enough if it's a 3. So we agree what those targets are. We then do 2 things. We do a survey with as wide a group of people as possible, so people from both parties, from the service provider and from the operator. We do a survey with them, but we also then do one-on-one interviews with key personnel to get even more in-depth information coming in. Now this is all the sort of input preparation phase, because really the most important thing is once we've analysed all that information is doing these workshops. It's the workshops where the real value comes out. And in those workshops what we do is to discuss where some of the lower scores are, where there are disagreements between the 2 parties about whether something's working well or it's not working well. And we get down to what are the root causes for that. And then finally we get down to what's the corrective action, how are you going to fix these things. We turn all of that then into some implementation plan, which is where we've got prioritised activities, we've got a timeline for it, and in some cases you're going to need budget for it as well. And it's that action plan then that is the key thing coming out of it. But also during the process, what we've done is to get 2 parties talking together in a way that they never normally talk together. And it's that sort of better communication between the 2 and a joint understanding and a joint discussion about the problems that then leads to the benefits coming out. And what does come out of it? Well, that's not surprising. It's changes, be it to particular roles, to the processes, to systems, and sometimes it leads also to some contract changes too. Recognition that there's certain things in the contract that is driving the wrong behaviours, and so the thing to do in that case might be change the contract. Bottom line is, what you're looking at is a better relationship and improved performance, and those are the key things coming out. There's 3 critical success factors that I always pull out on this. One is it has to be a joint activity. So it is like marriage counselling, you've got to have both parties there, both parties involved. It's no good one party doing it on the other. It's no good the operator doing it on the service provider. It's got to be done jointly. So both parties have to buy in to this is the right thing to do. The second thing is the survey needs to be anonymous. You get far better honest results coming in from people if they know that, okay, I can actually say what I want to say here. But you give people the opportunity to also identify themselves if they wanted to. And then the last thing is that, none of this is worthwhile unless you actually ensure that all those changes are actually implemented, that they're made. So it's following up, making sure those changes are made. And then, depending on the duration of the contract, so if it's a 3-year contract, you're not likely to have time to repeat it. But if it's a longer type of agreement, then it's a good idea to repeat it a few years later on. Well, a bit like a marriage, actually. You could do it every anniversary if you wanted to, over a candlelit dinner, but what we normally say is every 2 to 3 years should be enough. So that's the periodic reviews. As I said, I'm only going to talk about 2 aspects. The other aspect then is towards the end of the delivery phase, when you're coming up for contract, the contract is going to expire, you've got to decide what's going to happen. And Peter Snowden, who was talking earlier on, and he mentioned this, but I've actually heard him do a different presentation focused on just that contract renewal in the Netherlands. And when he tells the full story, it's a bit scary, in fact, what happened. And it took almost 18 months in their case, and they started down one tack, that didn't work, came back again, went off down a different route. Things changed within Vodafone, some things went into scope, came out of scope. It was a long, drawn-out process. So, oops. There we go. So, one of the key things that we say is you need to start early on this. And a very rough rule of thumb is that it's going to take as long to do this, or you should take as much time to do this as you took to do the contract in the first place. So there are some deals which have taken 12 to 18 months to do. Well, that means you've got to start looking at this 12 to 18 months before the current agreement finishes. So, as I said, we're in this phase, current agreement's in place, delivery is going on, but what you need to do then is, let's say, T minus 12 months or something, you need to start looking at what we said is what we call the strategy phase. And that is taking out your sourcing strategy, presuming you ever had one, and bringing it back up to date. And to do that, you need to look at your business plan, because almost certainly the business has changed, therefore objectives might have changed. And if you haven't kept your current agreement in line with that and moving along with it, now's the time when you really need to rethink that. So be clear about what the sourcing objectives are, make sure that they're in line with the business plan. The market has definitely changed. So since you did that first deal, which might have been 7-10 years ago, the service providers have changed, and they've probably changed dramatically, both in terms of their competencies, their experience, and most particularly what they can do in your market. So some people will have come in, some people will have gone out, some people have built up more experience. So the actual market has changed. You may be very happy with your current service provider, but you better look at some of the other potential partners out there. Coming out of all this then is the information to make a decision about what are you going to do in terms of moving forwards. And it could be that it's really one of three things in a way. Either you're just going to renegotiate with your current provider, or you're going to go into a competitive process which would involve your current provider. And the third choice is, very high level, you're going to bring this back in-house. So you're not actually going to go out to any service provider, you're going to bring it back in-house. There's far more variations on this, which is what this slide is about. You may decide as part of this process you're going to increase or decrease the scope of the contract. You may be moving, there's been a bit of a tendency, particularly on the network side, to go from a single sourcing deal where everything is outsourced to one service provider to multi-sourcing, where you're taking the best of breed in different areas. I think even if you're going to renew with your existing service provider, this is still a good process to go through. It makes sure that you are making the right decision, and it makes sure that you're keeping your service provider on their toes as well. Right now, I'd say, particularly on the network side, so putting BSS to one side, and I know there's a lot of discussion about BSS today, and we've got BSS sponsors today. But on the network side, I think there's a bit of a trend emerging right now, which is that whereas the service providers are pushing operators to try and give them greater scope, in fact, operators are starting to bring things back in-house. Not the whole end-to-end scope, but certain parts of it. So you heard Peter say they brought in engineering and the NOC back in-house. I know Sprint in the US has done a similar sort of thing. They brought engineering back in-house. So there is a bit of a trend there on the network managed services side to bring some things back in-house. And as I said, combinations of the above, various combinations that can come out of this. The important things, though, are, as I've said earlier on, you've got to start this process early if you're to do it properly. And in fact, in Peter's case, if he told you the full story, they went off down the renegotiate with their existing provider route. That didn't work out. They then went off down the competitive process, And in so doing, they ran out of time. So in fact, what they had to do was to extend the existing contract with Ericsson in order to go on through the process. So that's why I'm saying you need to start early, because you don't want to be having to extend the existing contract. I think the other thing that I'd highlight is that you need to check the existing agreement. I think this is one of the weakest areas in most managed service agreements, is the exit transition part of it. Because, I think what drives it is that most people are keen to get a deal done, and they focus on the here and now and how we're going to transition and what a wonderful marriage this is going to be. And they forget that at the end this contract's going to expire. So the things that are so often missed out in these deals is that, well, if you need to transition to another service provider, or you're going to transition back in-house, well, what happens about the IP? What happens about the people? And once you've transitioned out to a service provider, those people are actually merged into that organisation, doing other things for other companies as well. In fact, they may no longer be involved with your contract. So it's all these aspects that so often get missed out in agreements. And as I said, I think it's the weakest area of most agreements that I've seen. And then the last thing is, and I've seen this happen quite a few times too, don't take the easy way out. So the easy way out is to say, oh, we're happy with our service provider, well, we'll just extend it for another 3 to 5 years. And people don't bother to look at what's been going on in the market in the meantime. That's the easy way out. It's certainly a lot less work, but frankly, you know, is this the right thing that you're doing? So if you go through this process, even if you decide to continue to extend that agreement, at least you know you've made the right decision. So, very simple. This is sort of really aimed at sort of CTOs, CIOs, CFOs. 2 key things about the delivery phase that really, you know, I strongly recommend people think about. So one is this marriage, I do call it marriage counselling. It can be done by other ways. You know, you don't necessarily need to have an independent person like ourselves involved. The 2 parties can actually have in their agreement that they're going to do these reviews from time to time. But the other thing is starting work early enough before these contracts expire and going through a thorough process to make sure that you're making the right decision. So there we go. Thank you very much. I've probably caught up some time for you.